Welcome to Movies That Matter, and today's discussion of the film called Apart, which is about um, mothers and their children who have been separated because the mothers have been incarcerated in prison. There are many reasons why we chose this film. One, of course, it's a very powerful film, but also it's a very important issue that not everybody may know about. And as I was doing a little bit of research, over 300,000 children in Florida have an incarcerated parent. And almost 3 million children in America have an incarcerated parent. And those numbers are skyrocketing. 20, 25 years ago, those numbers were much, much lower. And I think our guests can help talk about the reasons for that. And the frequency of contact between children and parents in federal prison has also dropped substantially over the years. And I believe the figure is 80% of women who are incarcerated are mothers. So it's a very important issue to discuss and be educated about and figure out if there's some policy decisions that might be worthy of getting involved in for each of you to figure that out. So let me introduce Tammy Franklin. Tammy is the Associate Director of Academy Programs at Prison Fellowship, and she has been in that role or been with Prison Fellowship for 4 years. She's based in Oklahoma. So welcome from Oklahoma. And before joining Prison Fellowship, Tammy managed a transitional program for marginalized women. And she is a formerly incarcerated mother herself. Prison Fellowship, if you're not familiar with it, works to restore America's criminal justice system and those it affects. They help men and women replace the cycle of brokenness that landed them in prison. They advocate for justice reform and activate grassroots networks to do the same. They equip wardens to bring restorative change to their facilities. They care for prisoners' families and help strengthen the bond between children and their parents who are behind bars. They call on the church to lead the way in caring for those impacted by the criminal justice system. Welcome, Tammy Franklin.
Thank you, Susan. It is an honor and a privilege to be here with all of you today. And I can't tell you how excited I am just to be able to share some thoughts with each of you and to hear some of your thoughts as well. And so I thank you for that introduction. Like Susan said, my name is Tammy Franklin, and I work for Prison Fellowship, and also am a formerly incarcerated mom. And so when I was watching the movie Apart, what struck me, and probably that's not even the right word, not struck me, but what I was reminded of is so many of the women and the moms who are incarcerated have very similar stories. And so as I was looking at Amanda and Tamika and Lydia, I saw myself in a little bit of all of them, some of the similarities in their stories. I think I especially related to Amanda being born into dysfunction at a very early age, being caught up in addiction that came from her environment. That addiction led to trauma. That trauma led to criminal behavior, and that criminal behavior led to incarceration. And that is my story. I was born into Southwest Oklahoma City. My family was very, very poor. And it was pretty much my mom raising my sister and I. And at the age of 12 or 13, I began using drugs. Ended up using methamphetamine on a regular basis. And that early beginning led me into a life that it was the only thing that I knew. Drugs, alcohol, addiction was the only thing I knew. And what I've learned since then is a good citizenship and living a responsible life is a learned behavior. And so is dysfunction and criminal behavior and all those things. It's kind of what you're surrounded with. And then I know no way ever want to use that as an excuse for some of the choices that I made, but it was just my norm. And I think that the statement was even made by one of the counselors in the movie that people were just living out their norm. And so as my addiction grew, age 13 to 15, I began to get involved with criminal behavior, just things that would support my drug addiction. And at the age of 20, I think it was 20, I went to prison for the first time. The laws in Oklahoma, I'm sure, are different than the laws in Florida. We, for many years, and I think we still do, carry the statistic of having the most women incarcerated in the nation, if not the world. I don't think that we have the worst women here by any means. I think it's just the laws that we have began with the war on drugs, and our system was locking people up for being addicted, because that's kind of how it all started. I went to prison when I was 20. I had 2 boys at the time, and I would go into prison and I would do the time that was given me, and nothing would change. And I would get out and I would go right back to the same neighborhoods, the same dysfunction that I came out of. And this cycle continued for 20s and 30s and 40s. And until I was 50 years old, I went into prison for the last time when I was 50 years old at the age of 20. And was at the age of 50, but was given a 20-year sentence for writing checks to buy drugs with. And so something happened, I think, in that incarceration that had never happened before. And that was, I saw something that I didn't realize. I was in the county jail getting ready to go to prison again, and I received an envelope full of pictures from a family member. And I began to look through the pictures of missed memories of birthdays and weddings and graduations of all the people that I love so much. And I realized that the common theme through all of those pictures is that I wasn't in any of them. And my story is a story of faith. And it was in that brokenness that I began to cry out with a desperate desire to be someone other than who I was. And so I went to prison, and I ended up getting very involved with prison programs at that time around. I would go to the chapel on the prison yard. I would enroll in the programs that they had in there, because what had happened in the previous incarcerations is I truly believed that I didn't know how to be anybody besides who I was. And so I would just repeat that cycle over and over. And this last time around, at a time when I should have been looking at retirement, then I was going back to prison. I just wanted to learn to be somebody different. And they asked a question in the movie, and they said it in the title of if you had a movie and you titled it after your life story, what would that movie be titled? And so I think mine would be, it's never too late. It's never too late to change. It's never too late to receive hope, because in all of that, I think the hardest part of all of it, and Susan, if I talk too long, just cut me off, because it's a title the topic that I'm passionate about. But what the hardest thing was for me is when the drugs were removed and I had to face the choices that I had made. It wasn't so much about what I was having to face, but I would look at my sons and I would realize that once again, I had let them down. And the shame and the brokenness that comes with that, I think a lot of times people get caught up in that cycle of shame, because they're so broken by what they've done and the hurt that they've caused for the very ones that they love the most. Well, drugs are a pain reliever. And so in that pain, sometimes it's a natural response to reach out and try to numb again. And so, even today with my kids and my grandkids, we've been able to walk through a lot of healing. We've been able to somewhat bring our family back together, but still the consequences that they paid not having a mother or father there and being raised by their grandparents, still causes them deep pain today. And so, I have tools now that I didn't have back then that we're able to walk through some of that stuff. But I don't want to take more time than I'm supposed to. But one of the things that I liked about the movie as well is the women that were in that counseling, the women that were in that program, the leaders of that program were also previously incarcerated women who had gone back in to help women just like them. And so that's what I love about my position with Prison Fellowship, that I am able to give back the tremendous amount of support that was given to me, because people aren't going to learn how to change if someone doesn't show them how. If someone doesn't show them a new way. And so today, with my work with Prison Fellowship, I get to work with the Angel Tree program, which my children received Angel Tree when I was incarcerated, and that's gifts at Christmas from us. It's churches that get involved and supply the children with gifts. And then also I get to go back into the prisons and lead some of the programming that are on the insides now, and teach this set of values that I've learned along the way. And so, the end of my movie has turned out pretty well, but it was a long, long journey of pain, and not only for me, but for my family and for my children as well. And so I love the movie. I saw myself all the way through it and was just reminded what happens when people get involved. You're muted, Susan.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Tammy. Yeah, it's very interesting to be able to now relate the movie to someone else who has experienced that, and you can let us know that you think that the movie was a pretty accurate depiction of what's going on. And just, as a lay person, I'm not a professional counselor by any means. I felt the counselors were very effective in that film, and we can learn more about that, and if Dawn believes that as well. Dawn, I'll tell you a little bit about her background. Dawn Colderman is the Senior Clinical Director at Avow here in Naples. And she's been at Avow for the last 16 years, working in multiple clinical capacities. She's also the director of several Avow programs, including its pediatric hospice, Avow Kids Bereavement, and Partners in Care programs. In 2021, Dawn led the Avow Kids team to record care numbers for the unique grief and loss children feel from death or any other significant changes in a child's life, including divorce, deportation, deployment, incarceration, or instability in the foster care system. Under her supervision, the Avow Kids Care Team incorporates art, music, and animal therapies to help children handle big emotions and have coping skills for a lifetime. Thank you so much for joining us, Dawn.
Thank you so much, Susan, and thank you for that introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm very, very pleased to be here. And while I'm very proud of the job that my team has done here at Avow at Aunt Janet's house, which is a freestanding home for children's loss and grief, part of me wishes our numbers weren't as good as they were and are and continue to grow on a daily basis. But I'm thrilled we're able to provide that support. I too was very moved by the documentary. I found all three of those women, it was so heart-rendering, so heart-touching to hear their stories. Tammy, I agree. I think having counselors on staff that have gone through the same situation is, quite frankly, probably the only way to get through to some of these adults, because having someone who's never gone through it have a discussion with someone, I don't want to say it goes in one ear and out the other, but it's almost like preaching to someone who hasn't been through it. So I found that continues to be very, very, very important to have someone who's gone through that. And very, very similar to my counselors, all of the counselors, including myself, have gone through some kind of personal experience with addiction or some kind of traumatic event. My own daughter herself spent a year in Collier County Prison with addiction issues. And going through that process, I'm sure we could have a whole nother conversation on prison reform and throughout any state and what could, should, and would be done. But that's a whole nother conversation. I think what we're seeing here at Avow is no different, again, anywhere in the country, is those numbers are booming for incarcerated parents, right? And a lot of it is gone, a lot of it is due to the drug and opioid addictions that we're seeing across the country, for sure. I think the spike really started for us during COVID or towards the end of COVID. We noticed the increase in the number of children that were losing one or both parents. Again, due to, for us, addiction and or deportation. And so how do we reach out to these kiddos? Okay, how do we get them? So our resources or our referrals basically come from one or two places. Sometimes it's the David Lawrence Center, which is our local nonprofit mental health organization here in Collier County. Oftentimes it's through Collier County Public Schools. And it's a relationship that I am now forming a really great partnership with the Sheriff's Department here in Collier County, with their chaplains, with other individuals within the organization to put us in contact with these kiddos. Most of them are, thankfully, and I say thankfully because I think it's so important for the reunification process, but also for the children themselves to stay with a family member if that is possible, versus going into the foster care system. Certainly that does happen, and we do work closely with Youth Haven, which is our foster care agency here in Collier County. But most of our kids, grandparent, an aunt, an uncle, or something to that nature, which is again one children. So we support them in a multitude of ways. I think what's important is that we support the caregivers themselves, okay? Again, whoever that adult is, that caregiver, is important to provide them with support. And we do that through our adult bereavement program. And for the kiddos, I think what's important to understand is that incarceration or employment, whatever the incarceration is from, is loss, and it's grief and loss. And it's very, very similar to a death. Okay. Children process loss and grief very, very differently than adults. And some of that is based upon their chronological age. Some of it is based on their intellectual abilities, quite frankly. Okay. Has the parent been incarcerated on multiple occasions? Because then that's an even deeper concern. If we have a parent that may be incarcerated for 30 days in county jail, we really try to foster that relationship with quote unquote jail mail. Can we send emails to mom? Can we do some kind of group meeting? Can we call them? And oftentimes we can do video chats, and it'll be one of my counselors, maybe my chaplain, mom, and the child, if we can do that. It's so important. They must keep in contact as much as possible. The kids need it. The moms need it. I think it's so very important. Children as young as 8 weeks. So we're talking about a newborn infant that might have been born in jail, or maybe born right at home, and then mom was incarcerated. They experience that grief and that loss. We have caregivers that'll say once mom was incarcerated, the baby became very fussy. They weren't sleeping well at night. They notice the change. Now, is that change because the caregiver has changed and they're feeling that stress? It could be. But stress is, stress, and children are suffering. So we make sure that we meet kiddos wherever they're at, first of all. Do we meet them at school? Do we meet them at their home, whatever that home may be? Do we bring them here to Aunt Janet's house? And the nice thing about that is, first of all, this home is beautiful, but it's a safe zone. We try to create a safe zone for these kiddos, somewhere that they can feel heard and listened to, and a fresh perspective, and they may not want to speak in front of whoever their caregiver is, not for any of the reason. They don't want to hurt their feelings. They don't want to say, oh, grandma, I'm mad at you, I'm angry at you. But here they can say whatever they want. We do it in age-specific groups. So we make sure that, a 5-year-old or an 8-year-old is going to grieve differently than a 16 or 17-year-old, right? So we want to make sure that we have different groups. We talk about what does it look like when mom comes back? Is mom coming back? They can be mad, and they should be mad, but let's not blame mom. Let's talk about why mom is there. Let's talk about what is it going to look like when mom gets back, because that mom doesn't ever stop. Moms never stop loving. They never stop loving. They never stop caring. It's never about that. It's never their kiddos. So the children tend to feel that blame. They feel that they're to be blamed that mom is there, or whomever their parent is that's incarcerated. So it's really important that we give them a place to heal, to grow, to learn, to give them the tools to go through, those life changes. What is it going to look like when their mom comes home? Life is very different. If you were to see all 3 of our women in our group in your documentary, Amanda, Lydia, and Tamika, when they went home, all 3 of them faced very different perspectives from their children when they went home. All 3, they were very different. And that to me was so profound. I know Bailey, Tamika's daughter Bailey, had only really known mom, right? Versus via screen and phone calls and occasional visits and things like that. But yet when mom went home, now that communication broke down, right? She was accustomed to having a relationship via video screen or a hug every once in a while. Now when mom came home and been that parental figure, mom struggled with that. And so did Bailey. Bailey was raised by her grandma and grandpa. She struggled with that. Amanda's son decided to stay with grandpa, I believe, and not move in with Amanda, although she had done an amazing job of getting a job and securing an apartment and things like that. But he had built his life somewhere else. And I think what's so important for these moms is they did not push their kids. All 3 of these moms let their kids grieve and work through their process on their own. And Amanda was okay with her son staying there. He had friends, he had school, he had sports. That was his life. And to pull him from that would have just done so much harm. Lydia's 2 children, they processed 2 different ways. So the younger son was much more forgiving, for lack of better words, to mom. She was so happy she was home, and he was significantly younger. Her teenager shut out, right? He headphones on, hood over his head. He was mad. He was angry, but she let him work through whatever he had to work through on his own. And I really applaud all 3 moms for not pushing. And that again is part of the bereavement we do with our parents, is don't expect them to come running into your arms and think everything is great and you're going to go out for ice cream and we're going to live like we did before. You really need to work independently and then together as a family unit. And it is a lifelong struggle, as Tammy pointed out. It's lifelong. And you don't ever expect them to forget it, but you need to learn tools as a family to work past it. And I think that is something that we do here well. And I think the movie depicts that, your documentary depicts that very, very well. I almost wish there was a part 2 because I really wanted to see how, Lydia's husband at the end of the documentary was very ill. She struggled with now having those opioids back in the house, which had been a trigger for her initially. And for me, the nurse, because I'm a nurse, toward the end of the video, it showed how she had some fentanyl patches and some oxycodone in the house. And I know that's going to be a struggle for her. And yet she was so amazingly focused on her children. I really hope that kept her stable and kept her, available for her children, at all times. But I think what's very important to kind of piggyback on it is giving children the opportunity to express themselves, good, bad, or indifferent, giving them the tools to learn how to grieve, because it is a grief, it is a loss, and it has to be age appropriate. And very, very important, they have a professional do that alongside with some support for the caregiver and or mom when she comes out of the prison system. But I do think that the prison system itself in the United States, I know here in Florida, I can personally work with Collier County Sheriff's Department. We need to do a better job at providing the space and the tools while mom is incarcerated with her children to maintain that relationship better than through a video camera, better through an email, because we thrive as human beings on touch. A hug goes a long way. Tears go a long way. It's very hard to do that via video.
Thank you, Dawn. A lot to talk about. We have a few questions in the chat, so let me start with those. One question is, what are the chances that the women in the movie will make it once they're out of prison? And what kind of support are they getting once they're out?
I can talk on that just a little bit, and I don't know the exact statistics. I know that the odds are against them simply because so often they go back to what they know. They go back to their normal, thinking that maybe even they're going back to mom's or they're going back home. And when they get back there, the family doesn't know how to deal with the issues that the woman is carrying. And so there are programs in Oklahoma called transitional homes or reentry homes. Some of them are healthy, some of them are not. But it's been my experience, if they have one of those healthy programs around them to walk the steps with them, usually with other women who have been through the same thing, then their odds of succeeding are much better because they have that community support. One of the things that all women or I'd say at least most women coming out of prison struggle with is I'm not enough. You know, it's wounded adult children raising wounded children, and when they're faced with the responsibility of this precious child and they're still wounded themselves and don't know how to be that mom, then again there's the shame and the guilt and all that stuff resurfacing. And so that they don't have a healthy environment to go back and walk those things through, the odds are against them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I imagine that not every community in this country has the wonderful programs that we saw in the movie and that you have in Oklahoma. There must be a lot of people who are not getting this type of counseling, both for the woman and the child and the rest of the family.
There really isn't. We do have some transitional housing here in Collier County. We do have some sober living homes. We do have some transitional housing. But like a lot of things in our area, they are few and far between. And because the numbers have skyrocketed to a point where there just is not enough of them, I think, as Tammy pointed out, we're sending these women back into the same situation that they left. And yes, there is support out there, but you do need to reach out to it. Well, how do they know to reach out to it? Where do they go to reach out to it, right? Not all addiction issues are a mental health issue. A lot of them are, don't get me wrong, but some are not. You know, it's easy to say, well, they can reach out to David Lawrence, they can reach out to NAMI. And yes, they're out there, but how do people know to do that? How? Where do they go to resource that, right? So that's, I think, a huge lack throughout the country, not just here. As far as the reoffender rates go, I think it is very, very high. And I know it is in Collier County, and I think the reason for that is the lack of education, the lack of programming for them when they come back out, quite frankly.
Mm-hmm. I agree, Dawn.
Another question is for Tammy. How did you explain what was going on to your sons as you continued to do drugs and go back to prison?
Children's love is resilient, and it's hard for them to see anything wrong as far as what mom does. And so when I would go back in and I would get clean and they would come to the visiting rooms and we would have these conversations, and I would make these promises that I meant every word of them at the time, that when mom gets out, everything's going to be okay. And then when I did get out the first few times, it wasn't okay, and I would go back in. And I can look back now, and I can see incarceration after incarceration, the walls going up in their hearts, and I think it was so that they could survive mentally. And so they begin to not listen to what I said anymore because my actions didn't line up with my words. And so, at the end, they were pretty distant from me. They didn't want to hear what I had to say anymore, and they didn't believe anything that I did say. And when I got out, even my sons were grown by the time I got out. This last time when I had a change in my life, and my youngest, when I would come over, he would get up and leave the room, because he didn't want to hear it. He didn't want to go through the disappointment again. He didn't believe anything. And so it probably took about 5 years of me just steadily texting, just steadily showing up and not trying to force the issue. That was a good point that you made, Dawn. I don't think we have the right, after being gone so long, to come back in and try to be mom again. I think we have to earn that and kind of walk in that. So it took 4 or 5 years of just some consistent change that they were able to witness. But still, even today, I've been home since 2015, and we still struggle with trust and being able to communicate with one another on a healthy basis. I hope that answered your question.
Mm-hmm. Another comment is that in the film, Tamika and Lydia went home to supportive family members, and Amanda did not. So how important is that? And how also is it more common to have a non-supportive family than one who's probably received counseling along the way themselves?
Well, supportive families are always a blessing, right? But I think for example, in Tamika's case, her mom struggled with drugs her entire life. Okay. And then, Tamika followed that footstep. So we always go back to that. We need to break that chain, so to speak. And this is strictly my opinion, so please take it for what it's worth. I think that, Bailey, it's going to take a while for Tamika and Bailey to gain that trust, to get that relationship. But I think that it would be so important, if possible, for Tamika and Bailey to kind of get out of that situation, if at all possible. Mom continued to struggle. Tamika had struggles, getting a job, which is always an issue. And we face that. I was on the phone just earlier today trying to get a list of places that will hire convicted felons for a mom that we're dealing with now, that wants to break that cycle. And she wants to get her own place and get away from her parents who've been raising her child. But how does she get a job? Things of that nature. But I think the sooner that they could build their own life and their own structure and get away and quote unquote break that cycle, I think the better off that they are. But that's a struggle. Amanda, it didn't touch too much. Her father was raising her son. She went to a transitional or sober housing. She did get a job. She did give herself that time. I think it's very important that the parent gives themselves that time to heal and to grow and to get some things in order before bringing the kiddos right back. So I applaud them for that, of course. But she didn't push her son to move back in with her. She sought her own support to make herself a better person, to make sure she was stable enough before she even thought about bringing her son back in. And again, I applaud her for letting her son be where he is and what was ready for her son. And she is hoping that at some point in his life, he would be ready to live with her. But for right now, he was staying with her son. So is a supportive family important? 100% it is. But you need to make sure that supportive family is not in that same chain or that same cycle that you were in before. Tamika's mom was very supportive, but she had a history herself. So that's really, really tough. And I think in Oklahoma, as Tammy, alluded to, there's a lot of drugs and alcohol and a lot of familial issues with that. So you're talking about generational use of drugs, and now or any kind of opioid, and now we're asking this one family member, which has to be very strong to break away from that and take care of our kids. It's a struggle, and they're going to struggle their entire life, for sure.
I agree. And I think supportive families are very important, but I think also that they could be, you just have to be careful, because families come with expectations, right? And you coming out and it's like, okay, well, I've been caring for your child now for 5 years, and so you need to do this, and so there's just so many dynamics if you go back in and live with your family, well-meaning family that loves you very, very much. There's still, if you don't have that community of people who understand, standing beside you as well, it can be overwhelming at times.
Mm-hmm. Dawn, are there volunteers that are active in your program that also help with the children?
There are. We have about 184 volunteers here at Avow, and we have quite a few just for my kids program in itself. And those volunteers do have to go through a great deal of training and things like that. And we have them from the age of 18 on, which has been really important. I have some college students that are either psychology majors or social work majors that have either had a parent or someone that they know be incarcerated or gone through any kind of trauma, right? It's a trauma of any kind, and they can work with some of our kiddos. And sometimes children will react better to a younger person. And then more closer to their age, I should say. And then we do have some significantly older, volunteers. And yes, they work with them kiddos one-on-one, and they talk about, that change when mom comes back or dad comes back, and what does that look like? And really helping them process and work through everything they work through. So yes, we have a lot of volunteers, both here in our Naples location and in our Immokalee location. And I think, again, what's really important for us, because we do have completely different demographics here in Collier County, is that if you're going to be counseling or you're going to be supporting, you really need to know the group of individuals that you're going to be supporting, right? So in the population out in Immokalee it's a large Hispanic population out there. We have a large number of Haitian Creole individuals out there. And it's very important that we have both volunteers and staff that know those cultures, right? Because a lot of this is cultural. We need to know their cultures, what their expectations are, and make sure that we can meet their needs and that I have individuals that can meet their needs. If I was to walk in, not that they wouldn't respect or listen to what I had to say, they would. But if I had a mom, for example, like Tammy, that was able to come out there and talk to them, it would touch base a lot easier. So we are looking for some new volunteers to work out in my Immokalee office. And I think it's very important. Yes, we have lots of volunteers.
Great. Tammy, does Prison Fellowship work with volunteers as well?
Absolutely, we do. And just on a personal note, volunteers are the ones who changed my life, coming in and telling me that I mattered, and telling me that I had worth, and telling me that they were there for me. They'd show up when they said they were going to be. So yes, we use volunteers in that same capacity that come in and lead some of our evening programming, come in on a regular basis, and so they're able to develop relationships with the women on the inside and serve as mentors and facilitators and leaders. We couldn't do what we do without our volunteers.
Mm-hmm. That's terrific. Here's a different question. Would this film be any different, and how, if it were about dads instead of moms?
Not sure how it would be different, because we have a lot of single parent dads. We do. There, for a variety of reasons, I have two right now. Of the majority of my families are mom, but we do have two dads right now who are raising their children. They were incarcerated and they are now out. They've been released, and they are the primary caregivers of their children. And how is it different? I haven't experienced I only have two, but I haven't experienced much different. They are still primary caregivers of their children, and they're going through the same exact thing. And back to Tammy's point, the addiction or the incarceration does not define them. It does not define them. It's not who they are. They are parents, and they're parents first. Dads need the same tools as mom. It's just that we are seeing the huge increase in women being incarcerated right now.
All right. So these three women in the film, they were a part of a group of 30 who were getting additional help, and out of a group of 3,000 women. So what happened to the other 2,970 who were, I assume they were just more on their own and they weren't getting this special counseling and
I'm not quite sure. The movie didn't allude to
training.
Yeah, the documentary didn't allude to how those 30 were chosen, to the best of my knowledge. I don't know if it was just due to like a points program and they had gotten enough points either through education or however they were chosen for that job retraining. I know here in Collier County, we do have some programs to help women with job training, driving them to jobs, making sure that there are appropriate jobs, again, for felons. Very hard to find a job as a convicted felon, and helping them, do that. We actually have job fairs here in Collier County just for convicted felons, to kind of help them along the way. So there is a program here to run through David Lawrence. They will get them clothes. They will get them some education and training. They will drive them to their jobs, things of that nature. But I think those 30 women were so amazingly blessed because they might not have had that skill. They were working in a kitchen, and it looked like they were learning cooking skills and serving skills and managerial skills and empowering them, right? You need to be empowered when you come out, and you need to have those skills. Yes. Do I think we do a good job at that? We absolutely do not. Do I think we can do better? Yes. And I don't think anyone's going to argue that fact. But it's a struggle for sure. We need to empower these parents to be parents again and to be able to function on their own. We're never going to break that cycle if we don't empower them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I felt it was so inspirational to see Lydia working at that Tim Hortons store and then getting promoted to manager, mm-hmm. and just, continuing to work so hard. And then, if you throw on top of all of the relationship issues that these women are dealing with, they also have to find a job and perhaps find a place to live. It's, it's a daunting task. And they seem to be doing it really well. And I'm sure there are, as Tammy said, most don't. Most are not able to handle that. It seems extremely daunting. How do parents who have been incarcerated prevent their children from going down the same road? How do we break this cycle?
Well, I'm not sure that we can prevent them. We can help them. We can share what we learn. But in the end, sometimes I think the rate of people who are incarcerated who have a parent who is incarcerated, the statistics are very high. In the prison that I work in now, it's not unusual to see women serving time with their mom or their brother or other family members. And so it's definitely a family issue, because it's just, you learn what you're around. And so one of the things that I've done with my children and do with my grandchildren is just be completely and totally honest about decisions that we make, and communicate healthy versus unhealthy, and teach them that they are enough, that they're valuable, that they're worth everything in the world, because I think a lot of it comes from that self-worth, not feeling like that you matter. And that's just a theme that runs through dysfunctional families. And so think it starts when they're young. We begin to raise our children up, letting them know how important they are and how loved they are. But in my specific instance, I didn't have that opportunity, so I had to start where I came in at, and it's been a long road, and still sometimes the guilt of when I see what my dysfunction as the pain it's caused my children is sometimes just still overwhelming. But there's nothing that we can do about going backwards. So we just start where we are, share what we've learned. Again, I'm a woman of faith. I do a lot of praying. And so I think those are the things that have worked for me.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's very, very hard. That's a multifaceted question right there, quite honestly, Susan. So there are multicultural families in the prison system. We have the juvenile justice system here that I used to work in on the weekends as their nurse, and a lot of those kiddos had brothers and or moms and dads right across the parking lot in what we call the big kid jail. So how do you break that cycle? That's going to be a struggle society-wise, I think, throughout the country, but society-wise, that's a struggle. I think it's going to come down to education. I think it's going to come down to better opportunities. I think it's going to come down to, when we're in school, is it important for children to get a great education? It certainly is important, but we also need to teach different kind of skills. Children need to learn how to support themselves, where they look for those resources, whether it be a church, whether it be any kind of group that's in the area, having that support system. But breaking that chain is no different than breaking the chain of violence. It's a struggle. It's a daily struggle for these kiddos, but the more we can support, the better we are.
I agree. One of the things that we hear in the program that I'm in these days is we teach us basic set of values, responsibility, integrity, community, things like that. And so more often than not, the women will be learning the values and looking at the curriculum. And the thing that I always hear is, Miss Tammy, I didn't know. I just didn't know how to do this. And so they didn't know, and they didn't because no one taught them. Their children don't know because no one taught them. And so I'm a big proponent if we would take all these millions of dollars that we're spending on incarceration and use them in education and programming to teach the basic values. I think it would make a big difference in the way things are going now.
Mm-hmm. So in Florida, we have a relatively new law that felons, when they're released, they can vote again, right? So do they realize that? Are people educated about that fact when they're getting out of prison and they're released?
I do know, again, from personal experience with my daughter, yes, they're given that opportunity, but there is certain criteria that need to be met in order to do that. It does take some time. It takes some financial resources. It's not just you get released and you can vote again. There is some criteria to do that. But yes, when they are released, they do get some information on it, which I think is incredible. I know they do that here in Collier. I'm not sure if throughout the rest of the state. But yes, I think that opportunity is amazing because I think those are the individuals that are going to help us change. If any change is going to happen, that's how that change is going to happen, quite frankly. Because if you're not in that system or been through the system, so to speak, it's very hard to make a change.
Mm-hmm. One person comments that the women looked very well groomed and healthy in prison. Is this typical?
Not when they first come in. I think it's amazing to watch as the women begin to serve time and become clean. The drugs are gone. And one of the things that I realized about my own life is when I came in, I pretty much looked like a criminal. I did unkempt and my hygiene wasn't what it should be. But I learned so much by watching other women, because if you're raised in dysfunction and poverty, that's not discussed at your dining room table, so you just kind of survive. But because I spent 18 years in prison, one of the things that I learned about being a woman is from watching the other women. And so that, there are some classes in there that teach those basic things, depending on where you're at, what state you're at, different things like that. But yeah, I think it's the more that they've had clean time and the more that they see that they can succeed. And this is what I saw in the women in the video. They were learning that they were capable of learning. And that almost in and of itself becomes a new kind of addiction, that I can take care of myself, that I can learn new things. And it feels so good for someone who's been bent over in shame all of her life, and so we do begin to blossom, if you would, and begin to take care of us and all those things. I could talk a lot about that, but yeah, it's a very neat question.
Yeah,
I think they learn some self-respect when they're in there, because they didn't really respect themselves, and they come in and they learn that self-respect from one of the moms I'm working with now, from other inmates. She didn't love herself, and then she met other inmates there, and after she was clean, and she was kind of embarrassed at her appearance because she felt she gained a lot of weight. So we talked about the extreme high carb diet you get when you're in, and that's the way it is. So we talked about that, and now we're working with her and some, doing some Pilates and some free yoga classes that we found here in Collier County. But they learn to love themselves, and when you love yourself, you take care of yourself, and that's where they really support each other. So yes, those three women were beautiful inside and out. And yes, it was nice to see their appearance from the time that they were incarcerated until the time they left. They had a lot of self-love, which was very nice to see.
Yes, that was great. Now, I believe it's true that the women's prison, the one closest to Naples, is all the way in Homestead. Is that accurate, Don? Do you know?
Okay, here we go. Sorry. So I think that's, and I didn't understand it either until I had to get thrown up in it, that there's a difference between jail and prison, right? So if you have a very short stint, they will keep you in a county jail, which is the locale, which would be here. We have one in Naples and we have one in Immokalee. And then once you're either sentenced, and depending on the length of that sentence, then you're sent to a prison. So yes, I think Homestead, I believe, is the closest prison for women only, which then makes it
3-hour drive from Naples.
That's a one step harder for that reunification and to have that relationship with their children. Yes, very much so.
It's not very close to anything. So it must be hard.
It's kind of in the middle of nowhere.
To get volunteers to be part of these programs, to be willing.
Yes and no, but I'll tell you find a lot of those volunteer programs through churches and temples and different faith groups will have volunteers no matter kind of where they're located. We have several here in Naples. We have a few volunteers in Immokalee. We have some in Lee County, for families that live here in Collier. But I think there's more resources out there than you think, but you do need to go looking for them.
We have a program at Homestead. Prison Fellowship has a program called the Academy at Homestead. It's a year-long program where the women come and they live in a dorm together and they learn these values that I've been talking about. And most of the volunteers that we have in that program come out of the churches in Miami, I think.
Miami. Mm-hmm. Well, this has been extremely enlightening. I thank you both. Any last words from either of you? And as a reminder, this is recorded. We will post it. And if either Don or Tammy, if you have other resources that you would like us to share, you could email those to me and I'll be happy to include that for everyone. So, final comments.
I think for my final comment, I'd like to say that I think as a society, I think we need to do a better job at empowering our parents and our women in the prison community. I think we need to do a better job at educating them and supporting them and loving them. And I think as far as the children are concerned, I think the only way we're going to break that cycle, again, is to support them and to love them and give them the tools and the resources they need to care for themselves. And I think we also need to remember that they are still children and they process things differently. and their sense of loss and grief is very different than an adult. And I think we need to have an open heart and an open thought process just to love them at where they're at. And I do have some resources, and I will be happy to email them to you.
Thank you.
I think my final thought would be just to say that people in prison are simply that, people in prison. And they're not their crime. They're not their worst moment in life. 95% of the people in prison will be coming home back to our communities. And so when people get involved while they're in prison to teach them a better way, then the people that are coming out come out better instead of worse. And so just cannot say enough about in-prison programming laws that need to change towards rehabilitation instead of criminalization and punitive punishments. And so, yeah, I just thank you so much, Susan, for allowing us to come in and talk about this topic.
Thank you both so much. And everyone, we hope to see you at our Movies That Matter series next October. We have sent out the dates, and we'll be looking at films and topics, and you're welcome to send in your suggestions. If you have a topic or a documentary that you think would make a good program, please email us. Thank you, everyone. Our mission is to teach the lessons of the Holocaust, to promote, to inspire action against bigotry, hatred, and violence, and to promote mutual respect for all people. So thank you so much.